I stepped out of the dining room to take that phone call, the one confirming the 80 million had cleared, and was sitting in my new account at Morgan Stanley. When I walked back through those heavy oak doors, I bumped into the dessert cart on purpose, knocked over a water pitcher, made a whole big production of it, and while the busboy fussed with napkins and my son-in-law rolled his eyes and my daughter laughed, that nervous laugh she's had since she was 9 years old, I switched my wine glass with hers. She drank it 3 minutes later. 15 minutes after that, she was on the floor of the Hartwell room convulsing into her own hair while her husband stood frozen, holding his cell phone like it was something he'd never seen before. And I just sat there in my chair, 68 years old, watching my only child foam at the mouth. And I thought, I gave you everything. I gave you piano lessons and a horse named Biscuit and 4 years at Vanderbilt and a wedding at the Greenbrier that cost more than my first house. And you tried to put me in the ground for a wire transfer. My name doesn't matter. Call me what the waiter called me that night. He called me sir. He saved my life, and he didn't even know my name. Let me back up. I built Hartwell Marsh Logistics out of a single rented warehouse in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1983. 42 years. Refrigerated freight, mostly pharmaceuticals out of the Research Triangle. Some specialty food going up the I-95 corridor. I started with 1 truck and a phone in my kitchen. By the time I sold it, we had 401 for 11 employees, contracts with 3 of the top 5 pharma companies in the country, and a fleet you could see from a satellite. My wife Marianne passed in 2019. Ovarian cancer. 18 months from the diagnosis. She was 63. We had 1 child together. Our daughter, born after 7 years of trying, and 2 miscarriages we don't talk about. When Marianne died, I lost the better half of myself, and my daughter lost the one person in the world who could see her clearly and love her anyway. We never quite recovered from that, either of us. We pretended to. We did Thanksgiving and Christmas and her birthday at the Capitol Grill every May. But the bridge between us had termites in it, and we both knew, and we both kept walking across it anyway. She married a man I never trusted. I'll call him my son-in-law because that's all he ever was to me. A relation by paperwork. They met at a wine bar in Charleston, where she'd gone with girlfriends after her divorce from a perfectly decent dentist named, well, it doesn't matter what his name was. The point is, the dentist was kind and dull, and my son-in-law was sharp and shiny, and he wore a watch that cost more than my first truck. He told me at our first dinner that he was in private acquisitions. Marianne, God rest her, asked what that meant. He laughed and said it meant whatever he wanted it to mean. Marianne squeezed my knee under the table so hard I had a bruise the next day. He never had a real job in the 11 years he was married to my daughter. There were ventures. There were always ventures. A bourbon distillery in Kentucky that went under. A boutique hotel in Savannah that went under. A cryptocurrency thing he didn't even bother to explain to me. Every venture ended the same way, with a phone call from my daughter, late at night, voice thin and small, asking if I could help out just this once, just until the bridge loan came through. I helped out 14 times. I kept a list, $2.3 million over 9 years, bridge loans that were never bridges to anything. I'm telling you all this because I want you to understand. I'm not a fool. I knew what he was, I just couldn't admit what she was becoming. The buyer was a Dutch logistics conglomerate. The deal had been in motion for 19 months. My CFO, a woman I trusted more than anyone alive named, well, I'll just call her my CFO. She ran point on the negotiations. The final number was 82 million, of which 68 came to me personally after the partners and the lawyers and Uncle Sam. The closing was set for the 2nd week of October, a Thursday. My daughter called me on a Tuesday in September. She wanted to throw a dinner. To celebrate. Just the 3 of us, she said. Father, daughter, with her husband. The Hartwell room at the Capitol Grill downtown. The private dining room with the green walls and the oil paintings of dead horses. She said she'd been thinking about her mother lately, about how proud Marianne would have been. She said it'd been too long since we'd just sat down together. She started to cry on the phone. Real crying, or what I took for real crying. I told her, of course, sweetheart, of course. I'd been waiting to hear something like that from her for 6 years. I should have known then. The crying. She never cried. Not at her mother's funeral. Not when she lost the baby in 2014. She held her crying inside herself, like a hostage. And here she was, weeping over the phone about how much she missed me. I should have known. I drove down from my place in Lake Norman on a Thursday evening, the second Thursday in September, 2 weeks before the closing. I wore the navy suit Marianne had picked out for me at Brooks Brothers in 2017, the last suit she ever bought me. I parked in the garage on Tryon Street and walked the 2 blocks to the restaurant. It was raining, that warm, thick Carolina rain that comes in September and feels like the sky is trying to tell you something. They were already at the table when I got there. My daughter had on a green dress, the same green as the walls, and pearls that had been her mother's. My son-in-law was wearing a charcoal suit and a tie that probably cost $600. He stood up to shake my hand. His grip was too firm, like always. He told me I looked great. He told me he was proud of me. He used the word proud like he had any right to it. The maître d'hôtel brought us champagne. The good stuff, the Krug, the bottle that runs $420 in that room. My daughter raised her glass and said, "To Dad. To everything you built, to this new chapter." I drank. We ordered. My son-in-law got the bone-in ribeye, 68 ounces, the cut they call the tomahawk. My daughter ordered the sea bass. I got the lamb. We talked about nothing for the first hour. Her renovations. His new car, a Range Rover, ordered, not yet delivered. The weather, for God's sake, while my whole life was about to crack in half. I noticed 3 things during that first hour and a half. The first thing I noticed was that my son-in-law had stopped drinking. He'd had 2 sips of the champagne when I arrived and nothing since. He kept ordering bottled water, Pellegrino, no ice, lemon on the side. A man like him does not refuse alcohol at a celebration dinner. A man like him drinks to feel taller than he is. The second thing I noticed was that my daughter kept touching her purse. Not opening it, just touching it with her left hand, like she was checking that something was still inside. She did it 11 times. I counted. The third thing I noticed was the waiter. He was young, maybe 23, 24. Tall and thin in that way. Young men are before life finishes its work on them. Dark hair, very dark eyes, an accent I couldn't quite place. Eastern European, maybe Romanian or Bulgarian. His name tag said something with too many consonants to remember. He was very good at his job. Attentive without hovering, the way the best ones are. But there was something else. He kept looking at my daughter, not in any way that was rude or improper. He was watching her, studying her, the way a man studies a snake in tall grass. I noticed because I've been watching people my whole working life. You don't build a freight company from scratch by being naive about who's walking through your door. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed. It was my CFO. The wire from Rotterdam had cleared the escrow account a day early. I excused myself. I told them I'd just be a minute. My son-in-law made some joke about how the rich never put down their phones. My daughter laughed too loud. I stepped into the hallway by the kitchen. I was on the phone for maybe 4 minutes. My CFO walked me through some final paperwork. I told her I loved her. In that way, you love the people who've carried you through the hard years, and I hung up. That's when the waiter walked past me, then stopped, then turned around. He didn't look at me directly at first. He pretended to adjust something on a serving tray on a side table, and then, in a very low voice, very quick, he said, "Sir, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say this, but your daughter put something in your glass. The little white envelope. Powder. While you were on the phone. I saw it from the service station." I looked at him. I think I smiled, actually. I think my face did something strange and inappropriate. I said, "You're sure?" He said, "Sir, I am very sure." I watched her. She used her napkin for cover. She emptied it into your wine and stirred it with her finger. I would not say this if I was not certain. And then he said something that broke me. He said, My grandfather had a brother who was killed by his wife with the same kind of thing. In my country. I know what it looks like. I stood there in the hallway of the Capitol Grill for what felt like an hour, but was probably 8 seconds. The kitchen door swung open and closed, open and closed. I could smell butter and garlic and stewed meat. I could hear my daughter laughing at something her husband had said, the laugh of a 36-year-old woman who'd just poisoned her father and was sitting at the table waiting for the show to start. I asked the waiter what his name was. He told me. I won't put it down here. He's still working at that restaurant, and I won't have what comes next in this story attached to him by anybody curious. I asked him to do one thing for me. I asked him to come to my table in 5 minutes and to make a small commotion, drop a tray, knock something over, whatever he could come up with, something that would let me move my arm across the table. He nodded. He understood. He didn't ask a single question. I walked back into the Hartwell room. My daughter looked up at me and smiled. The smile she used to give me when she was 11 years old and she'd done something she wasn't supposed to do and she didn't know I knew. The same smile. Identical. After 25 years, the same smile. I sat down. I told them my CFO had confirmed the funds were in. My son-in-law's eyes lit up. He couldn't help it. The mask slipped for half a second, and there it was, the greed naked on his face. My daughter reached over and squeezed my hand. Her palm was sweating. About 4 minutes later, the waiter came toward our table carrying a tray with 3 desserts on it. He stumbled. Beautifully, he went down on one knee, and the desserts flew off the tray, and one of them, a chocolate something, splattered against my son-in-law's shirt. There was a moment of confusion. My son-in-law jumped up. My daughter stood, half laughing, half annoyed. The waiter was apologizing in a flood of words. I reached forward and switched the glasses. My right hand to her place, my left hand to mine. It took less than a second. Her wine glass was now sitting next to my plate. Mine was sitting next to hers. Nobody saw. I am sure nobody saw. My son-in-law sat back down. He was using a napkin on his shirt and saying something cutting about the kid. He used a word I won't repeat. He said it loud enough that the waiter heard. The waiter just bowed his head and apologized again and walked away. My daughter sat back down. She picked up her wine. She drank. She drank a long swallow. The way you drink when you'd been waiting to drink and now you can. She set the glass down. She looked at me. She said, "To you, Dad. To Mom. To everything." I picked up the other glass. I held it. I did not drink. I said, "To everything." We made small talk for another 6 or 7 minutes. My son-in-law was watching me. He thought he was being subtle, but he wasn't. He was waiting. He was timing. The first thing that happened was she said the room was warm. She undid the top button of her green dress. She picked at her sea bass with her fork, just pushing it around. She drank some water. She said the water tasted strange. Her husband told her she was being silly. He told her to relax. He told her she'd been working herself up about tonight all week. The second thing that happened was her speech started to slip. The consonants came out soft. She said something about her mother, about how Marian would have liked her dress, and the word dress came out wrong, like dresch. She laughed at it. She covered her mouth. The third thing that happened was she stood up. She said she was going to the ladies' room. She took 2 steps and her knee buckled. She caught the edge of the next table. The man sitting there, a gentleman with white hair eating with his wife, half rose to help her. The fourth thing that happened was she went down. She went down hard. The back of her head hit the carpet. Her legs were doing something I'd never seen a person's legs do. Her hands were curled in toward her chest. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't there. She was somewhere else. She was gone. I sat in my chair. I did not stand up. I did not move. My son-in-law stood up so fast his chair went over backwards. He was saying her name. He was saying it loud. The maître d'eau was running across the room. The white-haired man at the next table was already on his knees beside her, 2 fingers on her throat. Somebody was yelling for somebody to call 911. Somebody was crying. I think it was the white-haired man's wife. My son-in-law turned to the matron and said, "No ambulance. No ambulance. We can drive her. We can drive her ourselves. It's faster." There was a sound in his voice I will remember until the day I die. It was a sound that knew. It was a sound that knew. It was a sound that wanted her to not get to a hospital. The white-haired man looked up. He looked up directly at my son-in-law. He said, "Sir, this woman is having a seizure. We are calling an ambulance." He said it the way you say things when you used to be in charge of something. Later, I would find out he was a retired cardiologist from Duke. Later, I would learn that the world arranges itself, sometimes in ways that look like grace. The ambulance came in 11 minutes. They put her on a stretcher. Her green dress was torn at the shoulder. The pearls had broken, and they were rolling, very slowly, very politely, across the carpet of the Hartwell room. Her mother's pearls. I rode with her. My son-in-law tried to ride with us, and the paramedics said only one person, family only. And I said I'm her father. I climbed into the ambulance. My son-in-law stood on the curb on Tryon Street in the rain and watched us pull away, and the look on his face was the look of a man whose train has left without him. At the hospital they pumped her stomach, and they put her on a ventilator, and they ran a tox panel. The doctor came out 2 hours in. He was a young guy, mid-30s maybe, with kind, tired eyes. He said, "Sir, your daughter ingested a significant dose of a benzodiazepine. We believe it was crushed and dissolved into a liquid. Was she drinking tonight?" I said she'd had some wine. He said, "Sir, this was not a therapeutic amount. This was a fatal dose. Whoever prepared her drink either did not understand what they were doing or they were trying to kill her." I looked at him. I think I nodded. I'm not sure what my face did. He said, "Sir, we have to call the police. This is a poisoning." I said, "Yes." I said, "Please do." I said, "I want to make a statement." The 2 detectives who came were both women. One was maybe 40. The other was older, maybe my age, with a gray braid down her back. They took me into a small room with a vending machine and 3 plastic chairs. They asked me to tell them what happened. I told them all of it. The phone call from the wire transfer, the waiter in the hallway, the switched glasses, the toast. I told them about my son-in-law's 11 years of failed ventures. I told them about the $2.3 million. I told them I'd been having an attorney look into him for the last 6 months because something in my gut had told me to look. I told them my CFO had a folder. The older detective wrote it down without looking up. The younger one asked me, "Sir, why didn't you stop her? When you knew, why didn't you take the glass off the table?" It's a question I have asked myself every night since. I'm going to give you the answer I gave her, which is the only answer I have. I said, because I needed to know. I needed to know with my own eyes that my daughter would do this. If I had taken the glass away, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if the waiter was wrong, wondering if I was crazy, wondering if my child, the only thing left of her mother on this earth, was capable of what I thought she was capable of. I needed to see her drink it. I needed to watch her commit to it. And I am going to live with that for whatever years are left to me. The older detective looked up from her notebook. She said, "Sir, I understand. I want you to know that I understand." The younger one didn't say anything. They arrested my son-in-law at the hospital that night. He'd come in around midnight, working himself up into a performance of grief. He was practicing his face in the reflection of the elevator door when they walked up behind him. They took him out in cuffs. He saw me through the glass of the family waiting room. He mouthed something at me. I think it was a word I won't repeat. She survived. My daughter survived. Just barely. They kept her in a medically induced coma for 6 days. When she woke up, she could not move the left side of her face. 2 months later, most of it came back. There is still a small droop at the corner of her mouth when she smiles. The neurologist says it may never fully resolve. The investigation took 4 months. What they found when they pulled my son-in-law's records was uglier than I expected, and I had expected a lot. He had been embezzling from my daughter for 9 years. He had put her name on 3 of the failed ventures and used her signature, forged in most cases, to take out loans she didn't know existed. She was, on paper, $400,000 in personal debt the day she walked into the Capitol Grill to poison me. She didn't know. She thought she was getting half of $68 million when I died. He had convinced her that if I died before the wire transfer cleared, the estate would pass without estate tax. He had convinced her that I was sick anyway. He had convinced her that I had said cruel things about her mother on my deathbed, and that I planned to leave everything to a foundation in Marianne's name and cut her out. None of that was true. He had been working on her for 2 years. He had isolated her from her friends, from her cousin in Atlanta, who used to call every Sunday, from a therapist she'd been seeing in 2022 who'd warned her, in writing, that her husband showed signs of coercive control. The benzodiazepine was something called clonazepam. He'd gotten it from an urgent care doctor in Mecklenburg County by complaining of panic attacks. He'd been crushing the pills and storing the powder in those little white envelopes for almost a month. My daughter, in her statement to investigators, said he had told her it would look like a stroke. He had told her I would not suffer. He had told her it was a kindness. She is in a facility now, a residential program in Asheville for women with substance and psychiatric issues. 6 months in, court ordered as part of her plea. She pled to attempted manslaughter. She got 8 years suspended, with 5 years of supervised probation after the program. She wasn't the architect. She was a weapon. The DA agreed. So did I. My son-in-law is at Bennettsville. He got 27 years. The DA loaded him up. Attempted murder, conspiracy, 11 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of forgery. He'll be out around the time I'm dead. I went to see her once, in Asheville in March. They have a visiting room that's painted a soft yellow, the color of the inside of a lemon. She came in wearing a sweatshirt and no makeup. The droop at her mouth is barely there now if you don't know to look for it. She sat down across from me at the little wooden table. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She did not ask me how I was. She said, "Dad, I don't know who I am." I said, "I know, sweetheart. I know." We sat there for 37 minutes. We didn't talk much. I told her about the dogwoods at the lake. I told her the dock needed new boards. I told her I'd had the kitchen repainted. She nodded. She looked out the window. At the end, I stood up and I put my hand on top of her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. I told her I would come again. She nodded. I have not been back. Not yet. I will. I know I will. But not yet. The wound is still too open and I am still too old to bleed in front of her. The waiter. I have not forgotten the waiter. His name, the one with the consonants, is real. He still works at the Capitol Grill. The week after the trial ended, I called the general manager and made an appointment. I sat down with the kid in the same private room, the Hartwell room. The green walls had been repainted, I noticed. A different green. They'd had to after the carpet. The carpet was new, too. I asked him what he wanted. I told him he could have anything. School, a house, a business of his own. I told him I would pay for it. I told him I would have paid him $80 million and considered it cheap. He sat there in his white shirt and his black apron, 24 years old, and he thought about it. He didn't say anything for a long time, and then he told me he had a younger sister back home. She was 16. She had been accepted to a music conservatory in Vienna for piano. The family could not afford it. He had been sending money for 2 years, and it was not enough. I said, "Done." I said, "What else?" He said his mother had bad knees. She had been a cleaner her whole life, and she could not work much anymore. There was a surgery in Bucharest that would help. It cost more than the family had. I said, "Done." I said, "What else?" He said he wanted to go to school himself. He'd wanted to be a chef. Not a waiter, a chef. There was a culinary program in Charleston he had looked at. I said, "Done." I said, "You start in January." I said, "You live in a place I will rent for you, and you do not work while you are studying. You study." He started to cry. He was 24 years old, and he was crying in a private dining room at the Capitol Grill in front of an old man in a Navy suit. And I was crying too, and neither of us was ashamed of it. He graduates next spring. He's at the top of his class. His sister is at the conservatory. His mother walks without a cane. I sold the company in October, like I'd planned. 68 million after everything. I have set aside 30 million in a trust for my daughter to be released to her at age 50 if her therapists and her probation officer and a panel of 3 people I trust agree she is well. If they don't agree, it goes to a foundation in Marian's name that funds shelters for women in coercive relationships. I have set aside another 5 million for the waiter and his family, structured over 20 years. I have set aside 2 million for the cardiologist hospital's stroke unit. I have given the rest, most of the rest, to causes Marianne cared about. Cancer research. Music education for girls in rural counties. A few churches. I still live at the lake. The dogwoods bloomed last month. White and pink. The way they do. The way Marianne used to say, look like the trees were apologizing for the winter. I sit on my dock most mornings with my coffee. I watch the water. I think about my daughter. I think about her mother. I think about the kind young man with the consonants in his name. I learned 3 things, and I want to tell them to you, whoever you are, listening to me. The first thing is that money does not poison families. Money reveals what was already in them. There was rot in my house long before there was a wire transfer from Rotterdam. I just did not want to see it because Marianne wasn't there anymore to make me look. The second thing is that the people who save you in this life are almost never the people you raised. They are strangers. They are waiters and cardiologists and detectives with gray braids. They are the people whose names you don't know, whose lives you have not touched, who owe you nothing. Be kind to them, always. Tip them well. Look them in the eye. One of them someday might be the only thing standing between you and the dark. And the third thing is the hardest. The third thing is that you can love someone with your whole entire heart, and they can still try to put you in the grave. And you will still, somewhere underneath everything, love them anyway. That love does not go away because it ought to. It just goes somewhere quieter. It just learns to live without an answer. I am 69 years old now. I have buried my wife, and I have buried my faith in my child. And I am still here, on this dock, in the morning with my coffee, watching the light come up over the water. There is more to a life than the people who betray you. There is the water, there is the coffee, there is the boy at the conservatory in Vienna playing the piano somewhere, right now, because a young man in a white shirt told an old man in a navy suit the truth. I hope you have someone like that in your life. And if you don't, I hope you become one. That's the story. That's all of it. Thank you for sitting with me through it. I've thought about that night 1,000 times since. The green walls. The pearls rolling across the carpet. The way my daughter's smile looked exactly the same as it did when she was 11 and lying to me about a broken lamp. And every time I come back to the same hard truth, which is that nothing in this life happens out of nowhere. Everything is the harvest of something that was planted by somebody a long time before you noticed it was growing. My son-in-law did not become a man who crushed clonazepam into white envelopes overnight. He was 9 years in the making. 9 years of me writing checks instead of asking questions. 9 years of my daughter shrinking into a smaller and smaller version of herself while I told myself it was a phase. There were 100 moments along the way when I could have planted a different seed, and I chose, every single time, to look away. That is on me. I will own that until the day I'm in the ground next to Marianne. But there's another harvest too, and it's the one I want you to hear. The young man with the consonants in his name. The one who told me the truth in the hallway by the kitchen did not become that kind of man by accident either. Somebody raised him to speak up when speaking up was hard. Somebody, his mother probably, his grandmother maybe, taught him that a stranger's life is worth opening your mouth for. He planted nothing that night. He just watered what had been put in him a long time ago, in a country far from mine, by people who would never meet me. So I want to leave you with 3 things. Not because I'm wise, I'm not, I'm just old, but because somebody might be listening who still has time. The first thing is to be honest about the people you love, even when the honesty is unbearable. I knew what my son-in-law was. The first night I met him, and I let my daughter walk down an aisle anyway, because I did not want to be the bad guy. The bad guy I avoided being is the same bad guy who almost watched her die on a restaurant carpet. The second thing is to use your mind like it's the only thing you've got, because most days it is. When my gut told me something was wrong at that table, I didn't argue with it. I didn't talk myself out of it. I listened. Trust the small voice. It is almost never wrong. It is the part of you that loves you most. And the third thing is to keep going. After Marianne, I wanted to quit. After my daughter, I wanted to quit twice. But quitting is just a slower kind of dying, and I owe the waiter and the cardiologist and the woman with the gray braid more than that. I owe them a life that's still moving. So I sit on my dock, and I drink my coffee, and I plant what I can while there is still light.